What's up, adventurers? Today we're going to be re-recording a video because apparently half of my video got cut out, so we're going to be doing this again. So we're kind of going over something we've already gone over, but I do all my videos off the cuff. I do them very much sort of researched, but I like to do them as more of discussion points. They're not just research videos with a bunch of things that I'm going to talk to you at. I like to go at it from a perspective of here's my ideas. For better or for worse, that's how it works for us. So let's try this again. Today, we're going to be talking about just a little bit about the things that have changed in Mythics, but also maybe some possible solutions. So that aren't for me for once, you know, so we can say it's their fault when they're wrong or something like that. But anyways, let's get started with the video. The first thing that was posted that I saw was this one that says, was the dungeon key squish successful? We have had a couple of seasons now with squished keys, 1 to 10, essentially being M0. Do you think this has been far better game than the old system? I think this made key pushing less fluid with big jumps in difficulty from 9 to 10, 11 to 12. I want to say yes, 10 very much felt like where Mythic started. Does that equal a 0? No. I mean, I think that tends, I mean, there's probably a chart for this somewhere, but I believe that 10s back then felt like maybe 3s do now, in that mechanics start to exist, you know, not that they didn't before always, but just kind of like they start to hit your radar because they become more effective. Now, the comments, though, I think is what influenced me the most, because they kind of go a bit off the rails. So the first one says, "Would be better if Mythic Zero dropped champion to your loot, as now they're relatively worthless." That made me think. I was like, you know what? I don't want to bring up the conversation entirely, but you guys know that I've talked about this before, but I do not like the upgrade system. I think different pieces of gear always felt better than getting just pieces of gear that you upgrade over time, especially when, you know, it's like, do I do champion 6 out of 8, or do I upgrade my hero gear, or do I wait for hero gear? Then you're just stashing so many items to try to like wait, and it doesn't feel as good. Now, do I think that, I guess, earlier gear is the way to do this? I don't know. Like, I don't know if like giving people the pieces of gear is the way to do this necessarily. I do wish that the gear was a little bit more, I guess it kind of helps you get across those keys a little bit easier, but maybe those stats are dynamic and sort of taper off the higher you go. So maybe in that kind of way. But I do think that the system right now where it's like champion, hero, myth, like and lower with veteran gear, like you get veteran gear, it just doesn't feel good in my opinion. It's never felt good in my opinion. It's relative. I don't find the current Mythic Plus system in conjunction with the overall gearing process to be working. Delves catapult people straight to 615. Sure, people could do totally learner keys from zeros to get from 0s, 3s, and 5s and get no gear, or just get vault gear essentially. I 100% agree with this. I think that gearing, because, you know, the way that delves work, delves are meant to sort of get rid of that initial slog with gearing, and it does it pretty well. I think the problem with early keys, it feels like there's not a reason to do them other than to, like, for own personal learning. Like you should do them. It's kind of like playing the campaign before you play a multiplayer so you can get used to the controls. But does everyone do that? No. So I feel like a lot of people who come out of delves start with like 6s or 7s, straight into 7s, and that ends up being for like worse for wear, just because it's like it feels like you should jump into there, but it doesn't feel that much. So I feel like 0s, 3, 5 should be rewarded differently or more effectively to make that to feel like it's more like a linear progression, like you're just upgrading those throughout time. But the problem with that, and I've acknowledged this in the past, I'm not saying that this is the case or should be the case, but that ends up feeling like then that delves, even though delves are objectively easier, it does feel like at a certain point that you're saying that delves start where the beginning of mythics start, like, or delves end where mythics should start, and that doesn't feel fair. I don't think that should be how it is either. I think they should seamlessly integrate in that that gear attained from Mythic should align at some stage in Mythics more effectively. For example, how tier 11s, I think they say something like 623 item level, but I mean, I was doing them much sooner. So I think that should be more clearly aligned and visible in a track formation. So I do like that's an issue, but nobody's really kind of talking about what the issue here is, and that is, was the dungeon key squish successful? I do think the key squish was successful, but I do feel like Delves added a bit of a monkey wrench into that, in that Delves kind of skipped that initial portion of the squish, which is the most important in my opinion. I think that that Delves in a large way and portion feel like they skipped that initial part of going through mythics and kind of learning your mythics and getting up to that stage. So they squished it. It feels better. It feels less like you're spending a lot of time just getting to the beginning of where mythics should start. But in the end, they made it to where now you're skipping it, you're kind of circumventing it, and now it feels bad again. So it's like, so it doesn't necessarily feel good. I don't know necessarily how to remedy that in a way, but it's not necessarily the key squish that's the problem. It's sort of what came after the key squish that's the issue. So moving on to the next one, this is World of Warcraft's competitive dungeon mode is struggling. This is a PC Gamer article. In this article, it mainly talks about the drastically shrinking player pool and how that's gone down over time. This is normal for a normal season. As the weeks go on, they go lower. I've talked about the graph before. In this graph, if you've looked at the graphs over the seasons, they go in sort of an arc formation. But when they come back up towards the end, because, you know, a lot of people are doing catch up or trying to like get their last bits of gear, it ends lower than where it started. So it's not a complete U, it's very much like a halfway. And it just kind of keeps on going downward and downward, of course, from start of an expansion and just downward. I think that's the natural progression of things. I don't think that's necessarily a signifier of a bad season. But the fact that it does continually go lower over time is alarming, because I mean, less and less people are getting ratings above 1,000, getting ratings above 2,000, getting ratings above 2,500. Now, if you're one of those percenters who just get 2,500 and beyond, and you're like, well, it's easier than it's ever been, I don't think there's a problem. I want you to understand that this isn't representative of the data that exists. A lot of the data that exists is showing that it is decreasing over time, and the reality of it is that as these go up and down, it's not clear like it's the affixes, it's this or that. It's just a lack of player interest that is, even if things improve somewhat, or say affixes are good for that particular week, it's not enough to retain players, because you're seeing some increases over time, like for example, week 3 versus week 4 versus week 5 versus week 6, but they're not enough to where it's like, okay, it's higher than week 2. Like this, it's clearly going in a downward trend, and it's going to continue as such. So with that, the article also mentions that basically how Mythic dungeons worked according to them, they're basing a lot of it off of Raider.io, and they kind of use a lot of vague things like the meta being the issue, things we've talked about, of course, Mythic Plus being very difficult. I mean, it's something that they've noted is fixing the swirlies, you know, the amount of things that are happening. And then we've talked about things like tank survivability. We've talked about healers. We've talked about how communication is less and less in these groups, and there's more and more pugs doing these groups. A lot more people who are doing delves, which is different content. You don't have to necessarily think it's easier or harder, but it is different content from what Mythics is asking. So it's definitely changing content that doesn't really meld very well. But with the addition of more seasons, is it at a stage right now where the further iterations are going to improve? It doesn't really seem so. It seems like season 2 is going along the same sort of paths that we've seen before. And it seems like Blizzard is very much trying to get ahead of the game before they can work on what's currently there. So like, it seems like the content schedule has them looking so forward that they can't really look back or maintain what's currently here. That's what we're seeing a lot. So if I were to say, why is the competitive dungeon mode that is Mythic Plus a problem right now? I think the biggest issue is that we're not seeing changes that shake things up truly to what Mythics are like the issues of Mythics. I think we could diagnose all these sorts of issues, or say it's this thing or another thing, or this is a symptom we could resolve. But unless we really change some of the framework things about Mythic Plus, I don't think we're going to see any big sort of change. And I don't know if that's going to happen within a season, or in a season that they've so much prepared that it seems like they already have it figured out what they're going to do. So this would be like a season 3 thing. This would be like this would be like the latter half of this year that we could expect to see that, because I think we're expecting to see the next season this March. So with that being said, is the content schedule at any point going to change? Are we going to see big changes? Are we going to see like delivery promises that they've said? For example, less spiky damage on tanks, or and more fluid, you know, more over time. It doesn't really seem so. It seems like we're getting more AoE damage, we're getting heavy spikes, and then we're seeing huge learning curves with doing with mythics. And as the previous article we read before said, big jumps from 9s to 10s to 10s to 11s and 12s and beyond. So with this, I think there's a lot of things that are causing issues with mythics. But better than just trying to solve little symptoms bit by bit and then causing other problems somewhere else, I think there needs to be a big framework change. And we need to start seeing that from the devs. We need to see that they are actually noticing that. Right now, it seems like we're tending to the 1 or 2% that exists in the game. And that doesn't really help anybody who's like the majority of the player base. I mean, I don't want to say anybody, but the majority of the player base. Attending to the people who are the 1, 2 percenters, it doesn't help the majority of people who are struggling in mass. I don't want to say it's not just me. It's not just one skill level of player, but it is a good portion of them. And I don't think that you should the game shouldn't serve your delve only players. Your game shouldn't serve your highest degree. It should serve everybody in the middle who kind of want to mix it up, who want to do a little bit of each, who want to be at least skilled to at least meet the benchmark, meet at least the requirements of the end game. Because if you serve the low end, it seems good, but what ends up happening is you give things to a lot of players, and then all of a sudden you get all these free things. It feels good at first, but long term, it's bad for the game. If you're serving, like they have been, these 1 percenters who are very much the high degree of gameplay, then everybody in the middle starts to dislike it more and more until they just don't do it anymore. And that's what we're seeing now, is we're seeing a lot of people go towards the delve side of things, because it's easier to do this and achieve what you're looking for to at least a small degree than it is to do that. It's easier to go lower and still be sort of average, middle of the line, than it is to go higher. And that's kind of the unfortunate part about WoW right now, is that it's kind of losing that luster, that desire that people used to have. I know we're all getting older, so it's like well, we're just that's the reason, but it's just there's not a huge desire to do beyond what is required of us. And I think that that's unfortunate. You know, I wouldn't say that the classic way is the way to do things, in that the end game requires rating and you have to do the highest in order to get anything. I'm not saying that is the way, but I think there should be always a desire to do a little bit better, you know, to get something a little bit beyond what you have, because you want to experience it, because you have a desire for it, not sort of some incentive that gives it to you, but a challenge you want to seek out. Because these games, I think teamwork and community and guilds and Discord communities build based off of that. And that's the cool part about WoW, that I think could really revive Mythic in a great way. And the last article I wanted to talk about was some of these changes that someone listed. So we're going to go through these really quick. It says, hello, WoW community. I want to share some ideas to adjust the Mythic Plus system the way I believe it would benefit both new and veteran players alike. The proposed changes aim to balance the experience, reduce toxicity, and make content more accessible without eliminating the challenge or competitive component. Keys continue to upgrade if completed within time. Although this change is controversial, I believe the timer should remain part of the challenge. No, I agree. I think it's essential to it, and people who play Mythics would agree with you. This would prevent group composition from focusing solely on survival, while neglecting damage and other game components. Yeah, you know, it would make it too slow, and I think that the timer does influence really interesting builds that are really strong. It avoids dungeons being completed by taking hours of gameplay. Completing the key after time depletion will not lower your key. Yeah, so no. So if you complete, it upgrades it, but if you don't complete it, it still stays at its current level. I think maybe add to that, and instead of it staying at its current level in its current dungeon, change, like allow the change to a different dungeon. without having to complete the key as well. Like if you attempted but did clear it, still allowed to complete it. I think maybe you can, because I think right now it's the current level. So maybe just leaving it as is, because you can change it one time. Honestly, my opinion is allow people to pick the specific key that they start with. You know, if you're at least actively playing, maybe do it that way. So yeah, because I think you can change as long as it's the current level. But yeah, I agree with not reducing it as well. Keep timer for achievements. Completing all dungeons with all affixes within the timer should remain a requirement for special achievements. Sure. I agree that achievements being behind certain aspects is that's fine, as long as they're not time gated, in the sense that if you don't do mythics that week or something like that, now you can't get them ever or something like that. I guess that would be my only gripe with it. Not a big change, to be honest. I don't think that would end anyone's problems per se. Keep timer for IO score. Continue awarding IO score based on the completion time, with a minimum score given finishing the dungeon, even if it's overtime. I don't know if awarding the lowest denominator. I mean, I would say instead of just awarding people no matter what they get a clear for, I would say that allow additional rewards for people within every tier level. Maybe you can make brackets and have leaderboards, you know, maybe per realm or something like that, to where you get bonus rewards depending on where you place in there. And making brackets so it's not just the highest end who gets something. It's people within a certain level, like a certain bracket level. Just because that way it encourages people within every bracket to do at least a little bit higher than what they're currently doing, you know, something like that. Keep timer for crest rewards. Retain the current reward system for crest, offering rewards whether the dungeon is completed or within or outside the timer. I think crest rewards are pretty brutal. I mean, this goes for delves as well as mythics. I think the way that it should work for crests is that it should work. It should and needs to work per boss, cleared, and like kind of like there should be a flat rate as well as an improved amount rate depending on how well you clear it. So kind of like a scaling rate. So flat amount and then plus additional. Say you get plus clear, you know, etc. Additional minor adjustments, bonuses for interrupts, penalties for abandoning, replacement systems. Allow players who have to be replaced by others. However, yeah, the placement systems I've talked about a few times. A lot of people talk about it being too easy to abuse. So I don't know a way to prevent that without there being like active prevention, and Blizzard's not the best at that right now. Maybe they used to be, but I don't think it's that possible. Bonuses for interrupts and abandoning. I would say, I mean, just for community improvement, I do agree that good performance should be rewarded, and bad performance should not be rewarded as much. I don't think punishing is the way to do it. As much as people will disagree with me for saying this, I think that punishing always catches people in the mix who mean well and things just happen. And instead, I think it's just better to go, you didn't participate well, or you abandoned, so you get a fraction of the rewards depending on it. As long as you're doing, you know, you're actively participating though, you should get at least the base amount. Like we shouldn't punish people for just doing poorly. But as long as you're actively participating, you're there, you know, you should at least get the flat amount. Group composition and balance. The timer encourages extreme competitiveness, leading players to favor meta classes and top tier composition. I think that'll always be the case. I think it's just the nature of the way gaming works nowadays. Toxicity and player abandonment. Players often leave keys if they seem unlikely to be completed on time. Yeah, and people leave pretty early on those. And I don't really blame them, to be honest. You can kind of know pretty early on if a key's not going to work. A lack of tools in Mythic Plus for beginners, 100%. I think that is a problem. I think that there needs to be more tips and tool guides. I think that within your objectives, it could be easy enough to simply put in there, like, oh, your DPS role, here's your main things to worry about. And then also just place a timer for when to expect them. So it's like have these things there present in your face. So you don't have to like rely on Wildhead or guides in order to do that. I think putting those tools for people in those early keys, like a tooltip system that you can shut off if you don't want it, or to simply just have a system that needing to have big add-ons and weak auras. That would be really good for, I think, across the board. Repetition and issues playing with friends at lower progression levels. I've always said that the repetition is what will always eventually make the Mythic Plus system die off towards the end. Honestly, I know people might disagree with it, say that it requires too much balancing, etc. But have a start from a different point in the dungeon. A lot of these dungeons have like a certain amount of space, or the alternative is have an alternate way the key can be ran. For example, have mobs or trash mobs that say give bonus clear, so you could clear it in a different way, or you can go like, hey, let's get this mob that we don't normally get because it gives us bonus amount, and then maybe it takes a little bit more time, but you also get to avoid certain mobs. So maybe change up mob placement here and there, from week to week, just so people get used to something new and different. That way that shakes up the meta enough where people are getting used to it differently. But also guide makers become important because people don't get too set in a certain type of way. I feel like what happens is people do things one way so often that someone joins into, say you're joining in week 8. You're doing mythics, you're and everyone has a certain way that you do it. You don't do it, you get kicked from a group. You do it wrong, people leave your group. I think changing things up constantly would keep it to where everyone can join at a starting point and you're not so far behind because everyone's sort of on the same level. Would that require a lot of work by Blizzard? Probably. And will it happen? Probably not. But I just think it's wishful thinking that I think would shake things up to where it's not so set in their ways. And then on top of that, change trash mobs to where certain classes that don't normally do well. It's so clear which classes do the best in certain dungeons. You can see in the comps which classes are doing the best. You can see in Raid.io who is doing the best. Look at simply, if I was Blizzard, you look at those dungeons, say this one meta comp is always doing well. That next week, that or whatever week you want to put it into, go, all right, so these people who have been struggling the most to get groups, now they have benefits that they can do. Like there's an affix that hunters, you need to get rid of their enrage. Now we're pulling in more hunters or something along those lines to where we're pulling the lowest common denominator groups and classes and we're bringing them into it, whereas they previously weren't. Change it up, switch it up to where it's minor changes, but now someone is needed for a certain ability. A shaman is needed for lust, but why not do it for other classes that have certain abilities that are useful? For example, rogues for Mystic Scythe, that one small trash pack, it's really important. That's really key. Or warlocks, I guess you could use it for the small little portal. But have something in a dungeon that it's like, all right, I'm going to invite this class that I wouldn't normally invite because they have this useful ability that can help us get a clear a little bit quicker this week. So switch things up like that in a small way, and I think that would make a huge difference. And then let's see. Couple of long explanations and minor adjustments. I do agree with a lot is what's being said here. I do think, like I said with the previous article, that the biggest thing that's affecting WoW right now is the stagnation, and the feeling of there's nothing to look forward to when you know what to expect. So let's change it up, let's switch it up. But of course, if I missed anything in this video, let me know in the comments. Please give the video the like if you liked the video. And then subscribe to the page while you're at it. We stream on YouTube, we stream on Twitch. We're at 1,200 subscribers and climbing. Our goal is 1,500, and we're just gonna keep on going as much as possible, but I'm gonna keep on providing content. My next video is gonna be on Plunderstorm and providing Plunderstorm guide as a first-time player. So that's to be expected, but I hope you guys liked the video. But until next time, catch you in the next one. Peace.